You think you know your own child. You really do. You remember the smell of their hair after a bath, the sound of their laughter, the way they hold your hand. You don't ever imagine a day where their kindness feels like a threat. For me, that day is today. The glass of water he's offering looks so innocent, but the multi-million-dollar insurance policy I just discovered with my name on it feels like a death warrant. So I smile, thank him, and switch our glasses when he isn't looking. This is the story of how I started fighting for my life against the one person I thought I could always trust. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. And please hit that like button to show your support. The cicadas were singing their deafening high summer song, a sound so much a part of Charleston evenings that you only noticed it when it stopped. The air in the sunroom was thick and sweet, heavy with the scent of jasmine from the garden and the promise of a thunderstorm that never seemed to arrive. Leo walked in from the kitchen, a silhouette against the bright doorway. In his hand, he held two heavy crystal tumblers, beaded with condensation, the ice inside clinking a cheerful musical rhythm. "Thought you could use this, Mom," he said. His voice the same warm, gentle baritone that had once soothed my scraped knees and years later my broken heart. "It's a scorcher out there." He handed me a glass, his fingers brushing mine. A jolt, cold and sharp, shot up my arm, a sensation that had nothing to do with the chilled crystal. I smiled, a brittle thing I prayed would hold its shape. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're always so thoughtful." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. My throat was desert dry, but not from the heat. It was from the image seared behind my eyes. A screenshot from my laptop taken just yesterday. A life insurance policy. New one. 47 figures with a single beneficiary. Leo Benjamin Carter, my son. He sat across from me in the wicker armchair, his usual spot, and raised his glass. "To us," he said, his smile effortless, his eyes crinkling in that familiar handsome way that had always made me so proud. I raised my glass to meet his, the crystal chiming softly in the humid air. As he took his first long swallow, my gaze dropped to the small table between us. Mittens, my fluffy calico, chose that exact moment to leap onto the table, nudging my elbow with her head, demanding her nightly tribute of affection. "Oh, you silly cat," I murmured, my voice steady, an Oscar-worthy performance of maternal affection. My hand, obscured by the cat's sudden presence, moved with a speed I didn't know it possessed. In one fluid, silent motion I switched the glasses. His was now in front of me, mine in front of him. It was the work of a single, terrifying second. I took a slow, deliberate sip from the glass he had intended for himself. The water was just water, cold, clean, and refreshing. I prayed it would stay that way. I forced myself to swallow, the cold liquid a shock to my system. My eyes were locked on Leo, watching him over the rim of my glass. He took another deep drink from his own tumbler, the one I had just put in front of him, without the slightest hesitation. A wave of nausea and relief washed over me in equal measure. Was I wrong? Had my mind, rattled by yesterday's discovery, concocted a horror story out of a simple act of kindness? Yesterday. It all started yesterday. I had been looking for a 2019 tax return to sort out a minor issue with a property assessment. Leo, ever the dutiful son, managed all my finances, insisting my retirement should be free of such tedious worries. He kept most of my files on his sleek, modern desk in the home office he'd set up here after his father passed. It was his domain, a space I rarely entered. "It should be in the archived financials folder on the desktop, Mom," he had told me over the phone. So I went in. The file was easy enough to find. But as the PDF opened, my email client, which I'd used on his computer once before and foolishly left logged in, pinged with a new message. It wasn't an email but a notification. From Secure Life Financial. The subject line was simple. Policy confirmation, Eleanor Carter. Curiosity, cold and sharp, pierced through me. Clicked it. Policy was new, issued just 3 weeks ago. The premium was astronomical. But it was the payout that made the world tilt on its axis. $2 million. My life, apparently, had been appraised at a value of $2 million. And the primary beneficiary, the sole recipient of this staggering sum upon my accidental or natural demise, was Leo. His name, his social security number, his electronic signature at the bottom. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. I'd spent a full minute just staring, reading the cold, contractual language over and over, trying to make it say something else. But the words remained, stark and undeniable. Now, sitting in the sunroom, I watched him drain his glass, a bead of condensation tracing a path down his tanned throat. He set the empty tumbler down with a soft thud. "Ah, that's better," he said, leaning back with a sigh of contentment. "Anything good in the mail today?" His casualness was a masterpiece. It was either the absolute proof of his innocence or the chilling mark of a sociopath, and I had no way of knowing which. Before yesterday, if you had asked me to describe Leo, I would have used words like devoted, caring, my rock. After my husband, Richard, died, Leo stepped into a role no 20-year-old should have to. He managed the funeral arrangements, held my hand as the first handful of dirt hit the casket, and moved back home for a year to make sure I wasn't alone. His valedictorian speech at business school is still on a thumb drive somewhere. I remember him at the podium, looking out over a sea of faces but finding mine instantly. "None of this would be possible without my mother," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's been my inspiration, my North Star, my biggest supporter. She is my rock." The memory, once a source of shimmering pride, now felt like a shard of glass in my heart. He'd insisted on taking over my finances. "Mom, you've worked your whole life," he'd argued gently, spreading spreadsheets over the dining room table. "It's my turn to take care of you now. Don't you worry about a thing." I had cried with gratitude. My good son. My wonderful, caring boy. Now, every one of those memories was tainted, curdling in my mind. Was his care just a form of control? A way to gain access, to inventory his future inheritance? When he advised me to sell our old vacation cabin in the mountains, was it because it was a poor asset, as he claimed, or because a hiking accident was harder to arrange than a fall down the stairs in a house he knew intimately? The love I felt for him was a physical thing, a deep, foundational part of me. But it was now at war with the cold, terrifying knowledge of that insurance policy. It was a betrayal so profound it felt like a distortion of reality itself. I looked at the man across from me, the man who shared my husband's eyes and my smile, and I had to ask myself the question I never thought possible. Who was he? The loving son I had raised, or the stranger who had just put a price on my head? The night passed in a blur of sleepless, agonizing dread. I lay in my bed, listening to the old house groan and settle, every creak a potential footstep, every shadow a threat. But nothing happened. By morning, a sliver of desperate hope had worked its way into my mind. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. A mistake. Then the subtle poisons began. They weren't in a glass of water. They were in his words, his gestures. At breakfast, he pushed the vitamin organizer toward me. "Don't forget your pills, Mom." I'd been taking the same regimen for years, but his gaze lingered on me as I swallowed them, a new, unnerving intensity in his eyes. Later, as I was watering the ferns on the porch, he came out to join me, leaning against the railing. "You know," he said, his tone casual, "I was looking at the wiring in the attic yesterday. It's ancient. It's honestly a miracle this old place hasn't gone up in flames. A real fire trap." He shook his head as if in genuine concern, but the phrase fire trap hung in the air between us, ugly and charged. That afternoon, he returned from the store with a new brand of herbal tea. "The lady at the health food store said this is amazing for sleep," he announced, placing the box on the counter. "All natural. Said you'll sleep like a baby." I looked at the box. It was an obscure brand I'd never heard of, covered in calming pastels and promises of deep, restorative rest. Before yesterday, I would have been touched by his thoughtfulness. Today I felt a chill snake up my spine. A deep, restorative rest could so easily become a permanent one. I realized then that the plot, if there was one, was not about a single dramatic act. It was a campaign, a series of small, deniable actions. He wasn't just offering me a glass of water. He was offering me vitamins, tea, suggestions of faulty wiring and tragic accidents. The poison wasn't just in a cup. It was in the air, in his words, in his very presence, designed to lull me into a state of placid trust until one day, one of his helpful suggestions would bear its bitter fruit. Fear is a paralytic. For a full day it kept me frozen. But by the second evening, as Leo once again offered to brew me a cup of that new sleepy time tea, the fear began to calcify into something else. Resolve. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. I had no proof, only a screenshot and a gut full of terror. A direct accusation would only make him more careful, more clever. He would deny everything, paint me as a hysterical, grieving widow losing her mind. No, I couldn't be direct. Had to be smart. "Oh, that's so sweet of you, Leo," I said as he headed toward the kitchen with the teapot. As I stood up to follow him, I feigned a dizzy spell, my hand flying to my head. Whoa! A little light-headed. My other hand, the one holding my book, swung out and accidentally knocked the delicate ceramic teapot from the counter. It shattered on the terracotta floor, the dark, fragrant tea leaves scattering like dirt over a grave. "Oh my goodness! I am so clumsy," I cried, my voice a pitch-perfect imitation of distress. He rushed over, his face a mixture of annoyance and concern. "Mom, are you okay?" I'm fine, I insisted, already kneeling to clean up the mess, my hands carefully sweeping up every last leaf and shard. Just a little dizzy spell. The next morning I made my first real move. I found the number for Mark, my old financial advisor. Leo had convinced me to let him go 3 years ago, calling him old-fashioned and too conservative. "I just want to catch up, Mark," I said breezily into the phone. "It's been too long." We made an appointment for lunch. That afternoon I bought a new journal, a simple leather-bound book with a lock and key. I sat at my vanity, the place where I put on my public face each morning, and began to write. I documented everything. The insurance policy, the switched glasses, the comment about the wiring, the box of tea. Every detail, every veiled word, every unsettling glance. I closed the book and locked it, hiding the key in an old jewelry box. Then I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The wide, trusting eyes of the woman I used to be were gone. In their place was a colder, harder gaze. The fear was still there, lurking in the shadows, but it was no longer in charge. The trusting mother was gone. In her place was a strategist. And she was just getting started. The downtown bistro was loud, the clatter of silverware and lunchtime chatter a welcome shield of anonymity. Mark slid into the booth opposite me, his face etched with the same kind concern I remembered. He'd aged, his hair more silver than brown now, but his eyes were still sharp. "Eleanor," he said, a genuine warmth in his voice. "It's been too long. You look wonderful." "You're a terrible liar, Mark, but I appreciate it," I said with a small smile. "Thank you for meeting me." We made small talk through the appetizers, dancing around the real reason I was there. Finally, as the waiter cleared our plates, I took a breath. "Mark, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When Leo took over my portfolio, were you concerned?" Mark's smile faded. He steepled his fingers on the table, choosing his words with professional care. "Concerned is a strong word, Eleanor. Your son is aggressive, ambitious, but," prodded gently. He sighed, leaning forward slightly. "But he liquidated several of your most stable long-term holdings. The blue-chip stocks Richard had invested in for decades. He moved the capital into a series of very high-risk, speculative ventures. Tech startups, private equity funds I'd never even heard of. He said he was looking for a more dynamic return. When I advised against it, I was politely but firmly dismissed. My blood ran cold. And those investments? Mark looked down at his hands. As I'm sure Leo told you, they didn't pan out. All three of them went bust within 18 months. A significant loss. It was after that, he told me, that you both decided you needed to restructure your assets for better security. My mind reeled. The restructuring was when he'd talked me into giving him power of attorney. The failed investments weren't just bad luck. They were the excuse he needed to gain complete control. They were the manufactured crisis that led to this. I left the restaurant with Mark's cautious words echoing in my ears. The first solid piece of corroboration. Leo hadn't just been planning for my future death. He had been actively sabotaging my financial life for years. That night, after Leo had gone to bed, the house settled into a loaded silence. I booted up a new, untraceable laptop I'd bought for cash at a big box store 2 towns over. It felt cloak and dagger, something out of a spy movie, but I knew my own computer was a liability. For all I knew, Leo had installed tracking software on it. Fueled by coffee and a cold, burning anger, I dove into the names of the 3 failed companies Mark had given me. At first, they seemed legitimate, with slick websites full of corporate jargon about innovation and disruption. But as I dug deeper, past the surface-level marketing, the facade began to crack. There were no real products. No press releases past their initial launch. The addresses listed for their headquarters were nothing more than P.O. boxes or registered agent offices in Delaware. They were ghost shell corporations. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my search terms growing more specific. I cross-referenced the names of the company directors listed in the incorporation documents. And then I found it. A digital thread, nearly invisible but definitely there. One name appeared on the board of 2 of the companies. A man named Julian Croft. A quick search of Leo's social media, something I hadn't looked at in years, showed dozens of photos of them together, golfing at bars on a boat. Julian was his best friend, his business partner. The money hadn't just been lost in a bad investment. It had been funneled, moved from my secure accounts into these phantom companies and then, where? Into his and Julian's pockets. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. Eleanor Carter, a 62-year-old woman whose greatest technological achievement until last week was programming the coffee maker, was untangling a web of financial fraud spun by my own son. Julian Croft was the key. He was a ghost on corporate registries, but on social media he was anything but. His profiles were public, a monument to egotism, filled with photos of expensive watches and flashy cars he almost certainly couldn't afford. As I scrolled through years of posts, a pattern emerged. And at the center of that pattern was a woman. Her name was Chloe. She was beautiful, with long blonde hair and a smile that seemed both dazzling and vapid. She appeared about 2 years ago, first in group shots, then exclusively on Julian's arm, and then about a year ago on Leo's. The switch was jarring. In one photo, she was kissing Julian on New Year's Eve. 6 months later, she was in a photo with Leo captioned, "My everything." Leo had told me he was single. He'd said he was too focused on his career to have time for a serious relationship. It was another lie, casual and complete. This wasn't just a girlfriend. A little more digging revealed a public wedding registry at Bloomingdale's, a wedding planner's Instagram page featuring their engagement photos. He had a fiancée. The pain of this particular lie was sharp and surprisingly personal. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the secret life, the shared world he had built with this woman, a world I was never meant to know existed. He wasn't just my son. He was a man with a fiancée, a man planning a future that, apparently, required my death to finance. I looked at a photo of him and Chloe, their heads close together, smiling for the camera. He looked happy, carefree. I wondered, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, if she was in on it. Was she the reason he was so desperate? Or was she just another fool, taken in by the charming man I had raised? I needed to meet her. I needed to look into her eyes and see if I could find a flicker of deceit or a glimmer of ignorance. Ben, the private investigator I had hired on my sister's advice, had discovered where she worked, a high-end art gallery in the French Quarter. The next day, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that was elegant but understated. I walked into the gallery, feigning a casual interest in a garish abstract painting. Chloe approached me, her smile polished. "Can I help you find anything?" "Just browse," I said, turning to face her. "You have some lovely pieces." I let my eyes drift to a small landscape. "You know, this reminds me of a piece my late husband Richard once bought." "Richard Carter." I watched her face carefully. A brief, almost imperceptible flicker of recognition. "Oh," she said, her professional poise wavering for a half-second. I don't believe I know that name." "Oh, of course not, dear. It was years ago," I said, waving a dismissive hand. "My son Leo handles all those things for me now. He's so good with all that." Her composure cracked. A real, genuine smile lit up her face. "Leo. He's your son. Oh my goodness. What a small world." We chatted for 10 minutes. I played the part of the slightly dotty, proud mother. She played the part of the devoted, charming fiancé. But her guard was down. She gushed about the wedding plans, the caterer, the Vera Wang dress. Then came the slip I was waiting for. "We just put an offer in on a house south of Broad," she said, her eyes gleaming. "It's a bit of a stretch, but Leo's closing a huge deal at work. He says once it goes through, we won't have to worry about a thing." A house south of Broad. That meant millions. Huge deal. My life insurance policy. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. She wasn't a co-conspirator. She was the motivation. A very expensive motivation. And the clock was ticking. It was time to set the trap. I needed to see his desperation with my own eyes. I needed to confirm that the pressure Chloe had spoken of was real and immediate. The next morning I went to my bank, a different branch where no one knew me, and made a cash withdrawal. $50,000. The teller looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but processed the transaction. Back home I called Leo, pitching my voice into a state of manufactured hysteria. "Leo, thank God I reached you. Something terrible has happened," I cried. "I got an email, a man from the IRS. He said my accounts were compromised and I had to move my money or I'd lose it all. I was so scared I did what he said. I took out a lot of cash." "Mom, what?" His voice was sharp, cutting. "What did you do? Tell me exactly what you did." "I don't know," wailed. "I got scared after I did it. I think it was a scam. I have the money, it's here, but I was so frightened I hid it. I can't even remember where, my head is all fuzzy." I was leaning heavily on the confused old woman narrative I was building. "I have to go, someone's at the door. I'll call you back." I hung up before he could reply. Then I walked out the front door, got in my car, and drove to a coffee shop down the street. I opened my new laptop and pulled up the feed from the tiny spy camera, disguised as a smoke detector, that Ben the PI had installed in the main hallway 2 days earlier. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 15 minutes later, Leo's car screeched into the driveway. The camera feed showed him bursting through the front door. There was no concern on his face, no worry for his mother's well-being. There was only raw, frantic panic. He tore through the living room, yanking cushions off the sofa, throwing books from shelves. He went to my writing desk, rattling the drawers. He stormed into my bedroom, his movements jerky and violent. He was searching, tearing apart the house not for a lost, confused mother, but for a lost stash of cash. I watched the footage, my coffee growing cold in my hands. The image of my good son was finally, completely shattered, replaced by the ugly reality on the screen. A desperate, cornered animal, and he was hunting in his own home. The game had changed. Had him. The lawyer's office was the antithesis of Leo's world. There was no chrome or glass, only dark wood, shelves overflowing with thick leather-bound books, and the faint, pleasant smell of old paper. Ms. Albright was a woman in her 50s with shrewd, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found immensely comforting. "So," she said, after I had laid out the basic, sanitized version of my request, You wish to completely restructure your will and your power of attorney, effective immediately. That's correct, I said, my voice firm. For the next hour we worked. I dictated my terms, and she translated them into unforgiving legalese. The house, the stocks, the savings, my late husband's art collection, everything was to be placed into a trust. Leo's name was never mentioned. The sole beneficiary of this trust was to be my cousin, a quiet woman from Oregon I hadn't seen in a decade, but whose integrity was beyond question. Then came the masterstroke. I want to add a specific clause, I said, meeting Ms. Albright's gaze. A provision. If my death is ever deemed suspicious, or not of natural causes by any authority, a portion of the estate's funds are to be immediately allocated to hiring a private investigator to assist the police. Ms. Albright's pen stopped moving. She looked up at me, a single eyebrow raised. It was not a question of confusion, but one of understanding. She saw the shape of the story without me having to tell it. I see, she said slowly, a newfound respect dawning in her eyes. She made a note on her legal pad. That can be arranged. I walked out of her office into the bright afternoon sun, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I had just disarmed him. I had taken his prize off the table. He could plot and scheme and try to poison my water, but he would never get what he was after. For the first time I wasn't just defending, I was fighting back. My annual physical was 2 days later. Dr. Evans had been my doctor for 20 years. He had treated my husband, given Leo his tetanus shots. This made what I had to do both harder and more necessary. Everything looks good, Eleanor, he said, scanning my chart. Blood pressure is excellent for your age. That's good to hear, I said, clasping my hands in my lap. To be honest, I've been a little worried lately. I've been feeling so forgetful, confused at times. Dr. Evans put the chart down, giving me his full attention. Confused how? I looked down, feigning embarrassment. Silly things. Misplacing my keys, forgetting appointments. The other day, I nearly caused a spill in the kitchen. Just a dizzy spell out of nowhere. I let out a little self-deprecating laugh. Leo is so worried about me. He's a good boy. He's always bringing me these new vitamins, herbal teas. Things he says will help my memory and my sleep. I just hope they don't interact poorly with my blood pressure medication. I saw the doctor make a note in my file. Well, it's always best to stick to what I prescribe. Let's list these supplements you've been taking. I carefully recited the names of the teas and vitamins Leo had brought me. I wasn't accusing my son of anything. I was just a concerned patient, building a narrative. I was creating an official medical record, a trail of breadcrumbs for someone to follow if the worst happened. If I were to die from an accidental overdose, my file would now show that I had been feeling confused and that my son had been supplying me with a cocktail of unregulated substances. It was a story. And now it was in a doctor's permanent file. The next day I booked a flight. I told Leo the first needed a short vacation, a little getaway to clear my head. He was surprisingly eager for me to go, likely seeing it as an opportunity to search the house for the non-existent cash. The thought made me sick, but I smiled and let him drive me to the airport. I didn't go to a resort. I went to Phoenix, to my sister Carol's sprawling, sun-baked ranch house. We had grown distant over the last few years, a rift I now realized Leo had subtly engineered, always making excuses why I was too busy to visit or take her calls. That first night, sitting on her patio under a blanket of stars so vast and clear they seemed unreal, I told her everything. The words poured out of me. The insurance policy, the switched glass, the shell corporations, the secret fiancé, the raid on the house. Carol listened without interruption, her weathered face growing harder with every sentence. When I finally finished, she didn't tell me I was imagining things or overreacting. She reached across the table, her hand covering mine, her grip as strong and steady as a rock. That miserable little snake, she said, her voice low and furious. Okay, Ellie. We're going to burn him to the ground. For the first time since I'd clicked on that email notification, I wasn't alone in this. The relief was so immense, so overwhelming, that I finally broke down, the silent, terrified tears I'd been holding back for weeks soaking the front of my shirt. Carol just held my hand, letting me cry it out under the desert sky. Her presence a silent promise of allegiance and revenge. "A lawyer and a doctor's report aren't enough," Carol said the next morning over breakfast. "He'll just say you were a confused old woman being manipulated. You need leverage. You need something to make him vulnerable." That's when she suggested we upgrade the private investigator. Ben wasn't just for installing cameras anymore. He was now an asset. From the safety of Carol's sunroom, we held a conference call. I authorized him to dig deeper, to go after Leo's accomplices. The information came back within 48 hours, fast and damning. Leo's partner, Julian Croft, was not the successful entrepreneur he pretended to be. He had massive gambling debts, owing money to some very unsavory characters in Atlantic City. He was desperate, making him a weak link. The leverage on Chloe was even better. Ben discovered that her wealthy family, who controlled her trust fund, had recently cut her off. The reason, according to Ben's source, was her fiancé. They'd run a background check on Leo, disliked his financial instability and his cloudy professional history, and had given her an ultimatum: him or the money. She had chosen Leo, likely believing his lies about a huge deal that was about to make them rich. The picture was now complete. It wasn't a well-oiled conspiracy. It was a triangle of desperation. Leo needed my money to secure Chloe. Chloe needed Leo to maintain the lifestyle her family had denied her. And Julian needed Leo to pay off debts that were about to get him into serious trouble. They were all leaning on each other, a house of cards just waiting for a firm push. I returned to Charleston a week later, tanned and projecting an aura of blissful relaxation. The change in the house's atmosphere was immediate. Leo was on edge, the failed search for the cash having clearly frayed his nerves. My calm, carefree demeanor seemed to unravel him even further. And so began my campaign of psychological warfare. I started small. I'd be in the middle of a conversation with him and trail off, a confused look on my face. "I'm sorry, dear, what were we just talking about?" He needed a signature on a bank form. I misplaced it. "I could have sworn I left it right here on the hall table, Leo. Are you sure you didn't move it?" I'd ask with wide-eyed innocence. I left Ms. Albright's business card on the kitchen counter. When he inevitably found it and asked who she was, I feigned total ignorance. "Albright? No, I don't know anyone by that name." How strange. Must have picked it up somewhere. I was gaslighting the gaslighter. I was embodying the very role he had hoped to cast me in, the forgetful, confused, elderly woman. But I was using it as a weapon. I was making him question my mental state, yes, but more importantly, I was making him question his own control over the situation. His lies were built on the assumption that I was predictable, trusting, and slow. But his mother was gone. He was living with a ghost, and it was beginning to haunt him. The pressure was getting to him. I could see it in the tight set of his jaw, the dark circles that had appeared under his eyes. The wedding was just weeks away. The down payment on the house south of Broad was due, and Julian, I could only assume, was becoming more insistent. My feigned incompetence was a constant wrench in his gears. Every document he needed my signature on, I'd misplace. Every financial question he asked was met with a vague, meandering answer. He was like a man trying to catch smoke. My newfound frailty had become his prison. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. It was storming outside, rain lashing against the windows, mirroring the tempest that had been brewing in our home for weeks. He came into the living room where I was reading, a glass of water in his hand, just like that first night. The audacity of it, the sheer, arrogant repetition, sent a surge of cold fury through me. "Thought you might be thirsty, Mom," he said, his voice strained. He held it out to me. I looked from his face to the glass, then back to his face. I didn't take it. Instead, I stood up, and as I walked past him, I let my arm brush against his, accidentally knocking the glass from his hand. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the water splashing across my feet. We both froze. The pretense, the carefully constructed play we had both been acting in, shattered with it. We stared at each other over the glittering shards of broken glass. His eyes, for the first time, held no trace of the loving sun. They were flat, cold, and full of a hatred so pure it was breathtaking. In that silent, charged moment, he knew that I knew. The game was over. "I've decided to host a small dinner party," I announced to Leo the following Saturday. He looked at me as if I'd just suggested we repaint the house in neon pink. "A dinner party? Mom, are you sure you're up for that?" "Nonsense. It will be lovely," I said with a bright, unassailable cheerfulness. "Just a few people. My sister Carol is flying in for a visit, and I want to celebrate. And you must bring that lovely fiancé of yours. Chloe, isn't it? It's high time I properly met the woman who has stolen my son's heart." The color drained from his face. It was a move he could not possibly counter. To refuse would be to admit he was hiding her from me. To accept was to walk into a trap of unknown design. He had no choice. The night of the party, I was buzzing with a strange, icy calm. Carol was my rock, her presence a solid wall at my back. Ben, the PI, arrived, and I introduced him to Leo as an old family friend who has been so helpful with my estate planning. I watched Leo's eyes narrow as he shook Ben's hand. He could smell danger. Then Leo arrived with Chloe. She was even more stunning in person, dressed in a chic black dress, a large diamond sparkling on her finger. She was also, I noted, visibly nervous, clutching Leo's arm as if for dear life. The five of us sat down at the dining room table, the one where Leo had spread his spreadsheets and promised to take care of me. The air was thick with unspoken truths and elegant lies. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Carol and I dominated the conversation, regaling Chloe and Ben with charming, funny stories from Leo's childhood. But each story was carefully chosen, a double-edged sword praising Leo for qualities, honesty, loyalty, integrity, that we all knew he no longer possessed. Leo sat in stony silence, a forced smile plastered on his face. Then, over dessert, I made my move. "I'm so glad you could all be here," I began, setting down my fork. "It feels like a time for new beginnings. In fact, Ben here has just been so helpful in helping me update my will and finalize my estate." I smiled sweetly at Leo, whose face had become a pale, tight mask. I then turned my full attention to Chloe. My voice dripped with sympathy. "Chloe, my dear, I was so sorry to hear about the disagreement with your family. It must be so difficult when the people who are supposed to love you most don't approve of your choices." Chloe froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips. She stared at me, then shot a panicked, questioning look at Leo. "What is she talking about, Leo?" Before he could answer, Carol leaned forward. "She's talking about your trust fund, honey. And speaking of finances," she said, her gaze shifting to lock on Leo, "Ellie and I were just looking at some of her old investment statements. We found the most fascinating thing about a few shell corporations. One was called Apex Solutions. Does that ring a bell, Leo? Your friend Julian Croft's name was all over it." Ben, the quiet observer, chimed in for the first time, his voice calm and authoritative. "Julian is in a great deal of trouble, Leo. Gambling debts. The kind of trouble that makes a man very willing to talk in exchange for a deal." Each statement was a blow, a piece of the truth laid bare on the polished mahogany table. Chloe looked from face to face, her own beautiful face crumpling in confusion and horror. The life Leo had promised her, the house south of Broad, the Vera Wong dress, it was all dissolving in real time. "Leo, what is going on?" Chloe's voice was a sharp, piercing cry that cut through the tension. "What are they saying?" Leo shot up from his chair, knocking it backward. "Nothing. They're saying nothing. My mother is confused, and my aunt is a bitter old woman." But the lie was too thin, too late. Chloe stood up, her eyes flashing with a fury born of humiliation. "My family, you told me they'd come around. You told me this deal was a sure thing. Was any of it real? Their argument was an explosion. It spilled from the dining room into the foyer, a cascade of ugly accusations and desperate denials. All the while, Carol, Ben, and I sat at the table, silent witnesses to the demolition. Finally, with a gut-wrenching sob, Chloe wrenched the diamond ring from her finger and threw it at him. It skittered across the floor like a dead star. "We're done, Leo," she choked out. "We are so done." She grabbed her purse and fled, slamming the front door behind her, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. Leo was left standing in the foyer, his chest heaving. He slowly turned to face me, and the look on his face was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. The mask of the son, the fiancé, the successful businessman, it was all gone. All that was left was a raw, primal hatred. "You," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You did this. You ruined everything." I stood up and walked toward him, stopping just out of his reach. I was no longer afraid. "No, Leo," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "You did this to yourself a long time ago. The moment you decided my life was worth less than a house, you ruined everything." 3 weeks later, the house was empty, my life packed into a series of brown cardboard boxes. Ben's anonymous tip to the SEC about Julian and the shell corporations had worked. Julian had been arrested, and Leo, facing imminent indictment for fraud and likely a deeper investigation into his other affairs, had vanished. He was a fugitive from the law, from his debtors, and from the life he had tried to build on a foundation of lies. The insurance policy was cancelled. Ms. Albright had handled everything. I walked through the silent, echoing rooms one last time. My realtor had assured me the house would sell quickly. It was a beautiful home, full of good memories that had been systematically poisoned. It was time for new ones. On the mantelpiece in the living room, I found one last thing I had forgotten to pack: a small, silver-framed photo of Leo. He was about 10 years old, with a gap-toothed smile and a baseball cap on backward, his arms wrapped around my neck. It was from a time when his love wasn't a performance, a time when my life was priceless to him. A single hot tear traced a path down my cheek, a tear of pure, unadulterated grief for the boy in the picture. For the son I had loved, the son I had lost long before I ever found that insurance policy. I looked at the photo for a long moment. Then, I set it back down on the empty mantelpiece and left it there. I closed the front door behind me, not looking back, and walked out into the bright, cleansing sunlight. My car was packed, the road to Arizona was clear, and for the first time in a very long time I was free. And just like that, it was over. I was free, but I lost my son in the process. Looking back, I wonder if there was another way. So I'll leave you with this. If Leo had come to me at the very beginning, confessed his debts and his desperation before the insurance policy, should I have given him the money? Let me know your honest opinion in the comments below. Thank you for following my story.